Good morning. Start today with an announcement. We will not be having in-person worship in Sutton tomorrow morning. I'll do a worship from here at home at 9 o'clock, and then we will be having in-person worship at our Savior's in McHenry at 10:30. There's so many members of Sutton that are gone that we're not going to gather that way. But tomorrow is a Communion Sunday, and so I'll have communion here at home, and if you're listening in, you're welcome to join us that way for Holy Communion as well. Um, as we look at Leviticus 21 and 22 today, God is speaking about more regulations for priests. And these words were spoken not only to the priests, but to the people as well, so that the people knew that God is holding the priests to a higher standard. And I know as well too, I mean, it seems like, we still do that today. We kind of put the priests and pastors, kind of on a little bit higher standard. They're supposed to be a little bit better than average. Well, we are average. Some of us below average. You never know that way. And Cheryl just laughed at that one for sure. But you know, but in so many ways, I mean, God holds all of us to a standard, and we are all to do our best to live holy lives, to be the best person that we can be in our community and everything else. But as he's talking to the priests here, I mean, about and this starts out with mourning the death of a loved one. I mean, a priest wasn't supposed to defile himself, become unclean, because of mourning someone's death, and it says, except for his relatives who are nearest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother. I mean, a priest, was supposed to hold himself apart from all of that and touching unclean things, and I mean, but yet the priest was the one that the leper would come to be declared clean. But the priest couldn't touch a leper because then the priest would be unclean. And so it was, they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard spot in a lot of these things. And they weren't to show themselves as mourning, I kind of skipped over a spot in back here. I'm not just sure where it was for sure now, but the pagan practices of cutting yourself. It's Leviticus 19 verse 28. You shall not make any cuttings on your flesh for the dead, nor any tattoo marks on you, for I am the Lord. And this was a pagan custom to cut and to scar yourself, to show that you were mourning the death of someone, or to shave a part of your head, or the side of your head, or to disfigure yourself somewhat in that way. And so God is saying, don't do that. I mean, if you're mourning, that's fine. We understand that, or I understand that. But God says, I don't want you to put a big show of it that way. And when we get into Jesus' time, he says, at one time he says, don't be like the stuffed up hypocrite, that prays out loud and says, "Oh, I'm glad I'm not like those others," but just pray honestly and in silence, and just admit that you're a sinner, and but the priests weren't to make of themselves a spectacle that way. And the high priest was even held to a higher standard than the regular priests. I mean, the high priest was the one who could go back behind the curtain the one time of the year, and was in charge of so much else. And and it was very specific as to the type of woman. I don't know if I should say the type of woman, but the woman that a priest should marry. A priest couldn't marry a foreigner, and the priest wasn't supposed to marry a prostitute. Well, I mean, we have one of the prophets, Amos, I mean, or Hosea, that, I mean, things change in so many different ways and stuff. But you know, uh, the priest could, some of the priests could marry a widow, but not all of the priests could marry a widow. And it's just, how do you keep track of all this stuff? I mean, and then, for the priest, no man of your descendants, speaking to Aaron, who is, it's his family, his line, are the priests. None of them who has a defect shall be a priest. If he's lame or blind or has a marred face or a limb too long. I mean, I think most of us, one arm or one leg is a little bit shorter than the other, but, not noticeable. But, the priests had to be, pretty nice specimens. Nothing wrong with them. They couldn't be a hunchback. They couldn't have a broken foot or a broken hand. And now this, I mean, a broken foot, broken hand, that can heal. So when that gets healed, then they're okay again, and that. But, if they have a defect, they shall not come near to offer the sacrifice to God. He may eat of the bread of the sacrifice. He can participate and do other things, but he can't come to do the sacrifice because he has a defect, lest he would profane my sanctuary, for I, the Lord, sanctify them. And again, it's just, this chapter ends with that verse. Moses told it to Aaron, his sons, and to all the children of Israel. So everybody knew. Everybody knew that these priests were being held to this little bit higher standard, that there were little bit different rules for them. And so, again, it was a way for the Israelites not to be bullied or to be coerced into, some actions because of the priests that way. We get into chapter 22, and it continues talking about the priests and how they would separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel. And again, I don't really quite understand all of this, but when it's talking about this and reading this, one of the things that came to my mind was, the parable of the Good Samaritan. When the priest went by on the other side of the road and the Levite went by on the other side of the road. They did that because if they touched this unclean person, this foreigner, they themselves would then be unclean and wouldn't be able to go into the sanctuary of the Lord or perform the priestly duties that maybe they were supposed to be doing that day. And so they were, in some ways, doing what they were supposed to according to the rules that God has laid down here back in Leviticus and in the Old Testament. But yet they were forgetting, that love your neighbor as yourself part of it, and to look out and to be helpful. But, in some ways, it helps when we know all of these rules and these laws of being unclean and what you can do and you can't do and what you got to do to get clean again. It makes a little bit more sense. And again, that was a parable that Jesus told. Whether it really happened or not is hard to know, but I'm sure at times things like that did happen. We get into the middle of chapter 22, verse 17. It starts talking about offerings that are accepted and not accepted. And again, it's the pure, unblemished, the bull or the calf or the whatever. And they couldn't have for some people they could have maybe a lesion or a scab on them, but other times no, they couldn't have. And talks about that for making an offering to God, a sin offering, a guilt offering, whatever it might be. If you were going to take a young bull, a young calf, a ram, whatever it might be, you couldn't do it unless it was more than 8 days old. Because out of respect for the mother of this animal that's going to be sacrificed, and in some ways maybe that might reflect as well on the 8th day the Israelite children, males, were to be circumcised. But it was very, very specific that. And it says, whatever you do not kill both a cow or a ewe and her young on the same day. I mean, this was, again, sacrilege. It was, God saying, pay attention to what you're doing and pay attention to what I'm saying to you. And um, in verse 29 again, when you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving, make sure you do it of your own free will. And again, don't do it because the priests are coercing you. Don't do it because your friends are saying you have to. Don't do it because of any other thing other than your own free will to make this offering of or sacrifice of thanksgiving to God. And that's our offerings today too. Our offerings of thanksgiving. And I had a pastor one time say, well, you guys just let anybody be members of your church. And I said, well, what's it take to be a member of your church? And he said, a commitment. And so, a demand that you have to do this, you have to do that. And our worship of God, our giving to God, is of our free will. And if we are coerced or made to do something, by human rules, that's not what God would have. And chapter 22 ends again with God saying very clearly these verses. He puts a lot of stuff together that hasn't been together before. He says, you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. And then the reminder, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. And it's just, I think it's a privilege to have a God that loves us, a God that forgives us, a God that welcomes us, and a God that doesn't, he's not up there finger pointing at us in so many different ways. But to have a God of grace and mercy is the best thing that we can have.